Cathy sat opposite Roger, bathed in the warm, inviting glow of the upscale restaurant. Her laughter flowed naturally, like a seasoned actress flawlessly portraying her role. Superficially, she appeared calm, relishing the evening, her eyes sparkling as she playfully whispered a joke to her lover. However, beneath this composed exterior, tension coiled within her. A relentless anxiety gnawed at her insides, a persistent sense of foreboding shadowing her every move. Each time her phone vibrated on the table, she flinched, a fleeting flicker of panic crossing her gaze before she forced another smile. Roger, however, remained blissfully oblivious, his demeanor smooth and untroubled as he savored his wine, as if the world outside this moment ceased to exist. But Cathy knew better. This affair was a reckless gamble. Roger was everything her husband Ben was not: daring, electrifying, unpredictable. He had swept her into a whirlwind romance, a stark contrast to her steady, dependable husband. Ben had been perfect in countless ways, a man she had deeply loved with all her heart. Yet, here she was, entangled in an affair with Roger, caught in a situation she couldn't justify. She had contemplated ending it countless times, fully aware she should. Every encounter with Roger was an opportunity to break away, to tell him it was over. But the words always eluded her, and she found herself irresistibly drawn back. Tonight, though, something felt different. When her phone buzzed again, Cathy glanced down and felt her blood run cold. A new notification glowed on the screen. "Enjoy this evening, because it will be over soon." The message was from Ben. A wave of dread washed over her, leaving her hands clammy and her heart pounding. She stared at the ominous words, struggling to comprehend. How could he know? What did "it will be over soon" mean? The restaurant around her seemed to spin, the sounds fading into a distant murmur. She fought to regain her composure, struggling to steady her breath. Noticing her sudden pallor, Roger leaned forward, concern etched on his brow. "Are you all right?" he asked softly, his hand reaching for hers. But she wasn't all right. Her world was teetering on the brink of collapse, and she was utterly helpless. Roger gently kissed her knuckles, unaware of the tempest raging within her. He continued speaking, but his words blurred into the background as Cathy's mind fixated on the message. The chill of Ben's warning snaked up her spine, relentless and unnerving. She had no idea what he planned, but one thing was certain: tonight would not end as she had envisioned. It had begun about a month ago. Ben had always trusted Cathy, never questioning her late nights or social engagements. But one evening, upon her return from a dinner with friends, something shifted. As she leaned in to kiss him goodnight, he detected a faint trace of an unfamiliar cologne, expensive, distinctive, and undeniably not his own. It was subtle, yet enough to plant a seed of doubt. Ben wasn't impulsive. He was patient, astute, and methodical. When he sensed that hint of another man's scent, he didn't lash out or confront her immediately. Instead, he began to observe, quietly and meticulously, day after day. He noticed subtle changes: Cathy's distant gaze, her eyes flitting more frequently to her phone, the way she kept it within arm's reach at all times. Sometimes, he'd catch her smiling softly at a message, a smile that twisted his insides with a cold certainty. Her behavior spoke volumes. Cathy, lost in the thrill of her affair, was too blinded by excitement to realize how careless she had become. She believed she was being discreet, that her secret was safe. But Ben saw through it all, and he wasn't merely waiting in silence out of hurt or bewilderment. He was strategizing. Every gentle word, every affectionate gesture was deliberate, a mask concealing the storm brewing within him. Ben didn't want to lash out in anger. That wasn't his style. No. Ben was waiting for the perfect moment, a time when Cathy would be too entangled in her deception to anticipate the reckoning that awaited her. Her phone buzzed again, and a jolt of fear shot through her. With trembling hands, she glanced down at the screen to see another message from Ben. "Do you really think no one will find out about this?" The words swam before her eyes, and a wave of panic seized her. She struggled to maintain her composure, her fingers curling tightly around her phone. but the pressure inside her was mounting, a suffocating force she could no longer contain. Leaving wasn't an option. Not here. Not in this exclusive restaurant where every eye could easily track her movements. The anxiety clawed at her, creeping up her spine like an inescapable shadow. The walls seemed to press in, squeezing the air from her lungs. Roger's voice became a distant murmur, indistinct and irrelevant, as her gaze swept the room. Everything appeared normal. Diners engaged in conversations, laughter, the clinking of silverware. Yet, Cathy felt the undercurrent of dread tightening its grip. Then she saw them, at a table across the room, her relatives, her uncle, her cousin and his wife, and worst of all, her sister. Their eyes were locked on hers, heavy with silent condemnation. Not a word was spoken, but their expressions said it all. They knew. They knew everything. Cathy's hands trembled, and the air felt thin as her mind raced. Her family had always been deeply conservative, unwavering in their values, and betrayal was something they could never forgive. The weight of their judgment pressed down on her chest, making it almost impossible to breathe. Her carefully guarded secret life was unraveling before her eyes. One by one, they stood from their seats, their gaze still fixed on her, full of silent condemnation. Cathy could only watch in horror as they turned and walked out of the restaurant, leaving her to drown in their silent verdict. Her thoughts spun wildly. This had to be Ben. He had known all along, and now he had ensured her family knew too. The walls of her double life were collapsing, and there was no stopping it. Just days before, Ben had met with Cathy's relatives in private. He had been composed and methodical as he laid out the evidence he had painstakingly collected. Photos, messages, every damning piece of her betrayal. At first, they were incredulous, shocked by what he showed them. But Ben was steady and resolute, leaving no room for doubt. He asked them not to intervene, not to confront her, but to witness how she would unravel her own life. Their agreement had been unspoken, but their disappointment spoke volumes. Now they were there, to witness it all unfold as Ben's carefully orchestrated plan played out around Cathy. The once warm and welcoming restaurant now felt cold and suffocating. It seemed as though everyone could see the guilt etched on her face. Roger, sitting across from her, noticed her growing unease, his brows furrowed with concern as he leaned closer. "Cathy, what's going on?" he asked softly, worry coloring his voice. "You're shaking. Are you okay?" Cathy forced a smile, but it was weak and unconvincing. She couldn't bring herself to tell him, couldn't explain the storm raging in her mind, the condemning stares of her family, Ben's cryptic messages. Everything was closing in, threatening to break her apart. She tried to steady herself, but the panic surged relentlessly. "I love you, Cathy," Roger said, his voice brimming with sincerity as he took her hand in his, holding it tightly. "If something's wrong, we'll figure it out. I won't leave you. Let's get out of here. Somewhere more private, quieter. Just you and me." Cathy's chest constricted. She wanted to agree, to escape this suffocating reality, but the words caught in her throat. Just as she summoned the courage to speak, a faint buzz cut through the tension. Roger's phone. He glanced at the screen, and in an instant, everything changed. His face went pale, the easy smile vanished, and his eyes filled with something Cathy had never seen before. Fear. Without a word, he stood abruptly, pulling out his wallet and hastily counting out cash to cover the bill. The suddenness of it left Cathy stunned. "Roger, wait! What's going on? Did something happen?" she asked, her voice rising with alarm. But he didn't look at her or respond. His movements were hurried, almost panicked, as if he needed to be anywhere but there. Cathy's hand shot out to grab his arm, desperate for answers, her mind spinning with questions. "Roger, talk to me. Let me come with you," Cathy pleaded. But Roger raised his hand, halting her. His voice was firm, colder than she had ever heard it. "No, I have serious problems to deal with. This will take a long time." Cathy's heart sank at his tone. She had never seen him like this. As he turned to leave, she caught a glimpse of his phone screen before it went dark. It was a message from a woman, but she hadn't seen the name. "Roger, please!" she called out, her voice cracking. But he didn't stop. He threw her one last look, his expression stern and distant, sending a chill through her. "Goodbye, Cathy," he muttered, and then he was gone, leaving her standing alone, stunned. Cathy sat in silence for a moment, processing what had just happened. She had believed Roger was free, that he had no other commitments. But as the pieces started to come together, the truth began to dawn on her. He had been hiding something all along, a wife, a life he had never mentioned. The man she thought she knew was entangled in his own web of secrets. Ben had known about Roger's double life long before Cathy ever suspected. Roger wasn't just another man seeking a fling. He had a wife, and their marriage was intertwined with complex business and property dealings that made divorce impractical. Instead of ending his marriage, Roger had sought out mistresses to fulfill his fantasies in secret. Ben, patient and strategic, had uncovered this secret, and, just a few days before tonight's dinner, discreetly slipped the details to Roger's wife. Now, everything was unraveling for Roger. As Cathy sat alone at the table, it struck her. Roger wasn't going to comfort her. He wasn't coming back. He would vanish from her life, just as he had disappeared from the restaurant. Cathy's phone vibrated again, shattering the silence that had enveloped her. Tears filled her eyes as she struggled to hold them back. Roger was gone. Her family had turned their backs on her, and now she was truly alone. The screen lit up with another message from Ben. "Don't go home, Cathy. You don't have a home anymore." Her heart raced as panic surged within her, the room beginning to blur around her. She stood abruptly, nearly knocking over her chair, desperate to fix things. There had to be a way to salvage this. Cathy hurried out of the restaurant, driven by a frantic need to stop her world from collapsing. Her breaths came in short gasps as she fumbled for her keys, finally managing to get into her car. Her hands trembled as she gripped the steering wheel. The engine roared to life, and she sped off toward the apartment, desperate to make sense of it all. The drive felt endless, her mind a whirlwind of fear and disbelief. He couldn't mean it. He wouldn't just throw her out, would he? She tried to calm herself, clinging to the hope that somehow she could talk to Ben and explain everything. But deep down, she knew the truth. He had been planning this for a long time. When Cathy finally arrived at the apartment, a sick feeling crept over her. The door swung open easily, but the warmth she had always felt stepping inside was gone. The place felt cold and empty. Her footsteps echoed through the room as her eyes locked onto the sight before her. In the center of the living room were several cardboard boxes, neatly packed with her belongings, her clothes, her shoes, her books, all reduced to mere contents of boxes. On the shelf sat 2 stacks of papers, one a pile of divorce papers, and the other a torn-up lease. Cathy's breath caught in her throat, her chest tightening as the reality of it hit her. Ben had ended the lease. She had to leave by tomorrow. Tears welled up in her eyes, her body shaking as the sobs finally broke free. Cathy collapsed to her knees, clutching the divorce papers as the weight of her choices crashed down on her. Ben had planned it all with chilling precision. The apartment had always been in his name, a detail Cathy had never given a second thought to. But it gave him the leverage he needed. While she had been at dinner with Roger, believing her world was still intact, Ben had moved quickly and efficiently, packing her belongings into boxes and placing them where she couldn't miss them. He'd signed the divorce papers, laying them out beside the torn-up lease, an unmistakable signal that her life there was over. There were no angry words, no dramatic confrontations. Ben didn't want a scene. He wanted Cathy to realize what she had lost when it was already too late. As Cathy sat on the floor, tears streaming down her face, her phone buzzed one last time. The final message from Ben appeared on the screen. "Cathy, you have made your choice." Lying on the cold floor of the apartment, Cathy sobbed uncontrollably, the weight of everything crushing her. The space that had once been filled with warmth and love now felt like a tomb, cold and empty, with only the boxes of her belongings as reminders of the life she had lost. Her tears felt endless as she struggled to grasp the finality of it all. In a desperate haze, Cathy reached for her phone, her trembling fingers hovering over Ben's contact before she pressed call. The phone rang, the long beeps echoing in the silent apartment, each one tearing through her heart like a knife. But no one answered. Ben was ignoring her. She remembered the plans they had made together, the life they were supposed to build. In 3 months, they were going to buy a house and leave this city behind for a fresh start. They had even talked about starting a family. They had dreams and plans for the future, all rooted in their love. Now, because of one reckless affair, everything was destroyed. Cathy hadn't wanted to lose Ben. She hadn't wanted to lose everything. All she had wanted was to feel that thrill, that secret excitement with Roger, thinking it would be harmless, just a secret fling. But it had shattered her life in ways she never anticipated. In a moment of despair, she thought of Roger. Maybe he would help her. Maybe he could explain everything. She dialed his number, holding her breath and waiting for him to answer. But there was nothing, not even a beep. Confused, she tried again, but the same silence greeted her. It took Cathy a moment to realize what had happened. Roger had blocked her. She was cut off completely, just like that, disappearing into the shadows where their affair had thrived. Her heart sank deeper, and her chest tightened with an overwhelming sense of abandonment. Had she meant nothing to him at all? The hurt became unbearable, and rage boiled inside her, a bitter fury at the world, at herself, at everything. She leaped to her feet and kicked the nearest box, sending it flying across the room. She punched another one, spilling its contents across the floor. Clothes, books, trinkets from her life with Ben, all scattered like broken pieces of her soul. She screamed and kicked, letting out every bit of pain until her body ached and her breath came in ragged gasps. 20 minutes later, exhausted and hollow, she collapsed in the middle of the mess she had created. Tears streamed down her face as she gasped for air, feeling utterly lost. With shaky hands, she grabbed her phone again and dialed her uncle. He answered after the second ring, his voice stern and heavy. The silence between them was thick with tension, the memory of his cold stare at the restaurant still fresh in Cathy's mind. "Uncle, I need your help," she whispered, her voice cracking. Her uncle's tone was hard and unforgiving. "My girl, you made a big mistake. This is a shame to our family." Cathy choked back a sob, but her tears kept flowing. "Please, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I need you." Her uncle's sigh came through the phone, heavy with disappointment. "I promised your father, Cathy. I promised him I'd look after you," her uncle said, his voice heavy with disappointment. "But you didn't just betray Ben. You betrayed all of us. Your father, your family. You've put us all in a difficult place." "I didn't mean to," Cathy sobbed, desperation cracking her voice. "I never wanted this." For a long moment, her uncle was silent. Then, with a deep sigh, his tone softened slightly. "Family doesn't abandon its own. I won't leave you, Cathy. But you need to understand, you will have to atone for this. It's not going to be easy, and things between us won't be the same. Not until you've made this right." Cathy's heart broke all over again, shame burning through her as his words sank in. But at least she wasn't completely alone. "Thank you, Uncle," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Don't thank me yet," he replied, his voice still firm. "You have a long road ahead, and you'll have to earn back our trust." The call ended, leaving Cathy with the sound of silence once again. She dropped the phone, her body limp and heavy with despair. She couldn't bring herself to move. All she could do was lie there, curled up on the cold floor, as the darkness of the night swallowed her whole. Hours passed, but she didn't care. She stayed still and broken until the first light of morning crept through the window, casting pale shadows on the walls of the empty apartment. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.